This upcoming D-backs versus Red series should have been about the battle of the superstar sophomores, but instead it looks more like Elly De La Cruz versus the limping Arizona Diamondbacks.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com, to see all of my latest work. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedonmlb and use code all lowercase lockedonmlb for a first deposit match up to $100. And thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Our goal is to hit 2,000 subs by the All-Star break. So please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. And please subscribe to all things Reds, Locked On Reds, that is, because on today's podcast, we'll bring on the man of the hour to preview the upcoming series, D-backs versus Reds. We got Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds on the pod today. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing good, Millard. Looking forward to this series, a series that was quite contentious last year.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about before this podcast, looking at the standings. Both of our teams kind of scuffling right now. Reds coming off the 5-game losing streak. D-backs have dropped like 5 of their last 6 series, and the one that they didn't drop was a 4-game split against the San Francisco Giants. I first want to start segment number 1 by getting into your brain, Jeff, and talking about the Cincinnati Reds. How would you say, when you thought about the expectations for the Reds entering the season versus how they are playing right now, what would you say about your team?
I would definitely say that they're below expectations at the moment, but it's not to the point that some would have you believe in Reds country. There are many who would feel that it's scorched earth, that it's over. We're disappointed. This team's not going anywhere. And it's May 6th as we're recording this, about to be, the first real series, the second full series here in the month of May. So I really think that everybody just needs to relax a little bit. There's still plenty of time in this season, but the Reds are on a pretty awful streak right now, having lost 5 in a row, and they've not hit the ball. They just scored 2 runs in 3 games against the Orioles. And granted, the Orioles are a good team, but they're good on the lineup side, not necessarily known for their pitching. Reds made their pitching look like Cy Young contenders there in that series, and they're hoping to kind of break out of this. But of course, speaking of Cy Young, I guess, we'll get into pitching matchups a little bit later on, but you got Mr. Gallen on the mound tonight.
Oh, yeah. He will be on the mound for game 1 against Cincinnati. And I want to ask you, what were your expectations for the Reds entering the season? Because I know I saw some news outlets there saying, you know what, maybe the Reds should make it to the postseason, or maybe they're like the hottest dark horse contender. I like the Reds coming to the season, but I don't know if I was there as a playoff contender for them just yet. I probably have them between 78 and 81, 82 wins, a nice frisky team that will be there right around September and then probably fall off the last few weeks of the season. What were your expectations for the Reds?
I think 85 to 88 is probably where they will be. A lot of it has to do with the fact that their pitching staff was just not healthy last year, and their pitching staff was much maligned. Their performance was not great all season long, but there were very few times where there was never a time, because Nick Lodolo missed pretty much the entire year, but there was never really a time where you had Green, Lodolo, Ashcraft healthy. And Abbott came up, but Abbott wasn't necessarily part of that core. He made himself part of the core with the way that he pitched. So coming into this season, I looked at it and I said, this pitching staff is going to be a lot better. And you've got all this young talent that, you do expect to take a step forward. You don't think that everybody's going to get better, but you don't necessarily expect everybody to take a step back. But right now, the slump is real. And you've got guys like CES who are supposed to be at the top, one of the top performers of this lineup, he's hitting under 200, and he's got some numbers that say that things are getting ready to jump up for him. But as of right now, they haven't jumped up. You've got Jamer Candelario, who they signed and to help stabilize the infield, and he's done anything but stabilize the infield. He's destabilized the lineup, depending on who you ask. So there's different factors of this team that are just not working out the way that I thought they would. I still think 85 wins is within the realm of possibility. And in this NL Central, where anything goes really between the Cubs, Cardinals, Reds, and Pirates, and really even the Brewers have started off super hot. It's anybody's game in this division. And I think that if they come out of this stretch that they're in right now, around 500, they're going to be cooking with gas for the rest of the season.
Okay, and why do you think that is that their offense has struggled so much? Because I will say, we'll talk about the pitching later. It has been very impressive. You look at a lot of the starters' ERAs across the board, very, very nice, all sub-4 dudes. But you look at that lineup, of course, one man stands out that I want to get to in a second. But the rest of the guys, not really too many standouts in this Reds lineup right now. You look last year at the Reds, the Spencer Steers of the world, the Encarnacion Strands, like you mentioned. Even a guy like Matt McLain, who's been out the whole season. What's been going on with that Reds offense? Like, why do you think there's been so many struggles? Are they just striking out a ton? Is it like a play discipline thing? Is it like the way that they approach pitches? Like, what are you seeing from your Reds offense?
It definitely feels like they're almost too conservative at times. Okay. And, they don't chase a lot, which is a nice thing, but they also don't swing a lot. And I was looking at this number. It was a number where they're one of the bottom 10 teams in the majors in swing percentage. They're one of the bottom 10 teams as far as contact percentage. And they're one of the bottom 10 teams as far as batting average on balls in play. So you put all of that together, and that's a team that's not getting that many hits. And that's why they're the last team in Major League Baseball in batting average right now. I think they're third to last in on-base percentage. And it's just a thing that this team is a really good base running team. Diamondbacks fans know what that is to be. Mm-hmm. You got to be on base to be a good base running team, though, and nobody's getting on base right now. So that's a thing that, as far as performances right now, like, they've dealt with injuries. TJ Friedl could return in this series, which would be a huge boost for this lineup coming off a broken wrist from spring training. And then you have, like you mentioned, Matt McLain won't be back until August, maybe September. And then you also have Noelvi Marte, who is going to be a very big part of this lineup, got busted for PED use. He won't be back until the end of June. So all of that to be said, there's also been illness that they've dealt with. There were stretches of games where they went 5-6 games without Jonathan India, 5-6 games without Jake Fraley, 5-6 games without CES, and 5-6 games without Tyler Stevenson. And those were all like peppered around. They weren't necessarily one big clump. And so this lineup has had to use a lot of Santiago Espinal, Nick Martini, Luke Mailey, Stuart Fairchild, guys that they're not supposed to be leaning on, have just gotten a lot of playing time, and it's added to their ails at the plate.
Yeah, Stuart Fairchild, former D-back, still chugging along out there in Cincinnati. One guy, though, that hasn't slowed down at all for the Cincinnati Reds, actually building upon what he did as a rookie, Elly De La Cruz. How do we stop this man, Jeff? The only thing I can look at when looking at his numbers, he does seem like a guy that does strike out a ton. Is there a certain pitch that maybe our pitchers as the D-backs need to throw at him to, induce some more strikeouts in this series?
It's all about fastballs inside. He lays off of them for the most part. Now, if they come at him too much with them, he might actually make an adjustment to it. But for the most part, you'll see him get called strikes where it's like he's jumping out of the way for an inside strike because he crowds the plate in his batting stance, and it's actually a strike. Like the K zone, lights up the spot where the pitch crossed the plate and all this other stuff. So he's never really getting cheated in that way. But to his credit, he has cut out the whole breaking ball low, swings over top of it every time. That was a huge thing for him in the second half of last year. He has really figured that part out, and his plate discipline as a whole has really come up. But opposing pitchers have found when you just really mash that inside part of the plate on him, right now, he has shortened his swing, but he's not gotten it to the point where if he's looking for something middle away, he's going to be able to adjust quick enough to hit that ball that's inside. So he normally lays off of it. There's going to be a lot of called third strikes and called first and second strikes on him whenever they hit that inside part.
Yeah, I don't have to tell you, Elly De La Cruz, one of the most electrifying players in baseball. If he can continue to improve that bat, not very long before he's one of the defining faces of the sport, if not there already. And I'm very curious to see, if he does have like a 40-70 season, if he's going to be the new MLB, the cover show athlete for next season. I do think that's in play for Elly De La Cruz. Now we'll flip the mic over to Jeff Carr as he asked me some burning D-backs questions as the D-backs and Reds face off against each other starting Tuesday night. Spring training is over and baseball season is officially underway. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your prize picks entries. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, take your pick of more or less and add them to your prize picks entries today. Get in on the playoff action and win up to 100 times your money on prize picks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. My favorite thing to do is pick more or less stats when it comes to my favorite players, especially during the NBA postseason. So whenever I see the Nuggets versus Timberwolves, I'm taking the over on Anthony Edwards points and rebounds. And when that hit, I love seeing money enter my pocket. And if you want to see some money enter your pocket, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app, use code LOCKEDONMLB, all lowercase, for a deposit match up to $100. Prize picks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know we were saying flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with your friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers, not Snickers. You can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the Apple App Store. Game on. All right, back here on the Locked On Diamondbacks, Locked On Reds crossover. And I want to ask you guys real quick, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now we're back here with Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds, and I will turn over the mic to him so the Reds audience can get some burning questions out of me about the Arizona Diamondbacks.
Yeah, and I mean, it's got to start off. I mean, we talked about Elly in the first segment. Last season, whenever the Reds and the Diamondbacks met, it was a big battle between him and Corbin Carroll. And there were some great highlights that involved both of those guys during that season. And as a fantasy baseball owner of Corbin Carroll, I got to ask, what gives, man? What's going on with this dude? Where is Corbin Carroll right now? Because I need him. My fantasy team needs him. And honestly, I don't necessarily know if I want him to get right against the Reds, but I need to see some good baseball out of Mr. Carroll, man.
Yeah, it's been a tough year for Mr. Carroll, and I wish I had more questions for you than I currently have, because I think all D-backs fans are just kind of grasping at the straws right now as to why Corbin Carroll's sophomore season had just gone off the rails. One of the working theories out there is this little injury that he had last season. He hurt his shoulder around the All-Star break. And if you look at the sample size since then, the numbers have not been that good for Corbin Carroll. But he was still like fine in the second half of the season post-injury. He just didn't have as much raw power, and the numbers took a little bit of a dip, but it wasn't to the point of what we're seeing right now in the 2024 season. Corbin Carroll looks like a completely different player at the plate than what he did last season. Some of it is just mechanical with his swing. There's been talks about how just way more flat. It's led to more, soft grounders, soft contact, maybe more pop-ups, stuff like that. But also some of it just mental. You could just tell Corbin Carroll is just not confident in himself right now. And that's where you never want to be as an athlete. I feel like a lot of his struggles right now are more mental than anything. I think it's more of the psyche of Corbin Carroll. It feels like he has a bit of the yips right now when it comes to his swing. Maybe he's starting to break out of it a little bit. He had a decent series against the Padres. You look at his numbers against fastballs this year. Last year, almost a 300 average against fastball. This year, it's like a 170 average against fastballs this year. I think from a plate discipline standpoint, he hasn't been bad. It's not like he's chasing pitches that he shouldn't be. His walk rate is still fine. His strikeout rate is still fine. He had just not been able to make that hard contact this season like we saw all of last year. I wonder how much of it has to do with the shoulder injury they dealt with last season. But Corbin Carroll, so far in 2024, has not been the player that all D-backs fans wanted after coming off the Rookie of the Year season he had last year, top 5 in MVP voting. If Corbin Carroll never turns it around with the D-backs offense struggling the way it is, he is the linchpin to everything that the D-backs want to do offensively. And if he never turns it around, hard to believe the D-backs have any chance of going back to another World Series.
It's going to be interesting because he kind of, I wouldn't say it reminds me, because Jonathan India went through some injury struggles of his own as well. But following his Rookie of the Year campaign, his year was a lot worse than what it was in year one. And just seeing the struggles that Corbin Carroll is going through right now kind of was indicative of that. And expanding out on that, you mentioned not making it back to the World Series and stuff. Is there a little bit of a World Series hangover that's going on in Phoenix?
I wouldn't call it a hangover just because I think it has more, maybe you could say the offense, maybe like a Corbin Carroll, but I think for the whole team, I look more as injuries as maybe the main benefactor as to why this team has struggled, because obviously when you sign Jordan Montgomery the day before the season starts, he's not going to be ready to start the year, so he's not a real injury. But if you told me the D-backs had their full team from day one, because this team is missing so many pieces right now. They're starting shortstop, their closer, half their rotation has been hurt the entire season. Like if we had this full D-back squad where you had Gallen, Kelly, Monty, Erod, and Fott in your rotation, I would have to believe that the D-backs, or at least a 500 team right now. And I don't know how many teams you could say 5 of your top 6 starters are going to miss at least one, if not the entire season up until this point. And your team is still going to be good. So I do think from a pitching standpoint, at least from the rotation, I want to give a little bit of grace there. But when you look at the lineup, I mean, this D-backs offense has been so feast or famine this season. I think 11 of their first 16 games has scored at least 5 runs. In 5 of their last 19, they've only scored 5 runs. I think 5, or what did I just say? 5 of their last 19 games, they've only scored at least 5 runs. That's what I want to say. So the last 19, they've been not good offensively is the main point. First 16, they were one of the best in the league. And so it's been so feast or famine. Guys like Lourdes Gurriel have completely fallen off. Eugenio Suarez, former Cincinnati Reds, would love that 49 home run season from him, but he hasn't gotten it going. Of course, Corbin Carroll, his struggles. So right now, offensively, can't really make any excuses there. Those guys just haven't, stepped up to the plate. But I would like to believe the D-backs are not a great team, but at least a 500 team if you have your full complement of starters in that rotation.
Yeah, and I think I saw too, Alec Thomas is returning for this series as well in center field. So I know he had a lot of good catches against the Reds last year whenever these two teams got together. So it'll be interesting to see him patrolling center field again. But yeah, with Suarez coming back to town, I mean, one of the top 5 in the last, probably top 3 in the last 10 years, as far as most beloved Reds that we ever got a chance to watch. So it'll be fun to watch him in a different uniform now instead of Seattle. But I mean, overall, this series last year was so competitive, and it felt like at times it was because both teams hit well, and at times it was because both teams pitched well. And when it comes to where both teams are, it kind of sounds like they're similar. They're pitching all right. They're not necessarily hitting the ball very well. I mean, seeing Zach Gallen in this series is going to be a very interesting way to get things going. But when it comes to these first 3 games, it's all about who gets out first, right? Because this series last year was a big determining factor in the wild card race. And I see no reason. And I understand right now D-backs and the Reds are both going through it, and they're both under 500, which is below expectations. But I see this being the same way again. By the time the end of the season rolls around, these 2 teams are going to be fighting for it, which means we got to talk about these pitching matchups, man. It's going to be a war.
Yeah, and that's why this series, despite it being like game 30 or whatever, is so important, because these 2 teams were battling for one of those wild card spots last year. And this is one of those early season series that could, make an impact once you get to the wild card race in September. So whoever wins the tiebreaker, it could all come down to this very first early season series between these 2 teams. Like you mentioned, we got to talk about the pitching matchups. And I do want to give a little teaser to the Reds fans out there, because there will be a couple of D-backs players. You mentioned one of them in Alec Thomas. There's another one also coming back as we talk about X factors in segment number 3. Moms are a gift, so give her the best gift this Mother's Day. Get gifts as thoughtful as she is with DoorDash. Select from hundreds of expertly crafted bouquets to the best of tech to self-care essentials and more, delivered right to her door. I'm a person that uses DoorDash about 3 times a week because I'm lazy. I don't like to cook, and I could get food and groceries delivered right to my door. So why would I ever walk outside my house? And guess what? This Mother's Day, you don't have to walk outside your house either if you want to get mom a gift. Get all your Mother's Day's gifts in one place on the DoorDash app. Get 50% off your next order, up to $15 when you spend $15 or more on your next flour, convenience, grocery, or retail order now with code LOCKEDONMLB. That's code LOCKEDONMLB. Order using DoorDash today. Terms apply. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Now we're back here with Locked On Diamondbacks, Locked On Reds for a little crossover. And let's get into some of those pitching matchups and X factors, Jeff, for this upcoming series, because we got some interesting pitching matchups. We got Zach Gallen versus Frankie Montas on Tuesday, Jordan Montgomery versus Graham Ashcraft on Wednesday. Then we got Slade versus Hunter Green. First one, start with game 1. Zach Gallen is someone who is an ace, of course, the best D-back pitcher that we have. But Jeff, he's also coming off an extended absence because, like I said, this rotation has been hurt. Zach Gallen left his most recent start after a few innings and then hasn't really pitched over the last 10, 11 days. He didn't go on the injured list, but the D-back said, let's skip a start. Let's give you a few days of extra rest. So very curious to see if this is going to be a completely rested Zach Gallen that can come out firing because he's fresh, or if this is more of a rusty Zach Gallen because of all the time that he's been off. But regardless, what do you expect from a Frankie Montas? And if we do get that elite Zach Gallen, can he match up with that man?
It's going to be interesting because Frankie Montas has really shown 2 sides to him in just a very short sample so far this year. His first couple of starts, he was dominant, just shutting guys down, couldn't be touched, and was providing the Reds with the ability to win. Then he went through a couple of starts where everything seemed to be just absolutely tattooed off of him. He was walking guys, putting guys on base. So we kind of seen the spectrum as to far as what we could get in both directions here from him. He's coming off of an extended absence as well. He was on the injured list because he got plunked by a 105-mile-an-hour line drive, which he's a guy too, like you just feel bad for him because he's coming off of that shoulder surgery that you're like, is he healthy? Is he not? This has nothing to do with that. And it's all just about bad luck. The fact that his throwing arm happened to be in the way of a line drive. Not many people are going to pitch their next time through the order, he basically set out 2 starts for them, and Nick Martinez took over for him in those spots. But I look for this to be probably about 5 innings. I'd say I bet Arizona gets like 2 or 3 runs on him or something like that. But I think that he is going to get back to where he was in his first couple of starts in the season.
Yeah, and I wasn't a huge Frankie guy when you guys signed him at the time, but I think this could be a better situation for him. Sometimes when you're in a situation like New York, the bright lights, the pressure just may not be meant for everyone. So I think going to a market like Cincinnati could be a little bit better for a guy like Frankie Montes. But you look at the next
Reds had some success with former Oakland A's that went to New York, didn't work out, and then come to Cincinnati. Okay. Sonny Gray is one of them. Okay,
I was like, I didn't know who that reference was for off the top of my head. But yeah, Sonny Gray, I mean, he's in
St. Louis now.
He was booed out in New York. That was a great time when he was in New York. Yeah. Man, I love seeing Yankee fans get upset. But the next 2 games in this series, we got Graham Ashcraft and Hunter Green. Both of them kind of year 3 breakouts, both of them tantalizing talents that have had roller coaster first couple years. We know Hunter Green, the man that could throw, the man that's a machine, right? Can throw 100 miles basically the entire game. Do you believe in the year 3 breakout for both of those 2 starting pitchers?
I do. I've seen some signs, especially for Hunter here recently, that things are really turning in the right direction. And it's funny because most Reds fans would be like, well, he's not really throwing that 3rd pitch. That's the thing he needs. But my argument to that is he needs to have confidence that whenever he rears back to throw that fastball, he knows exactly where it's going, because his first couple of years, he couldn't always say that. And he has said so in some post-game pressers where he's just like, figured out if I take a couple of miles off of it, I can pinpoint it and I can make it a dot. And that's much more valuable than throwing it 105 and not knowing exactly where in the zone it's going to end up. So he has learned that part of the game. So how does everything else follow suit? I mean, his last outing was absolutely amazing. And I want to see him build on that, especially in a Thursday day game where the Reds, this is going to be a weird turnaround, man, because they're playing Thursday afternoon. They get on a plane and they play in LA on Friday night. Like there's no off day in between. So they kind of, I don't know, like I almost feel like of the 3 games, if you were to tell me that the Reds can only win one of these 3 games, really want them to win Thursday so that they get on the plane feeling good. Glad that Green is on the mound to do that. And with Graham Ashcraft, his breakout is just more so in being efficient. He's not a big strikeout guy. And he, early on this season, has had some games where, he was getting a strikeout per inning and stuff like that, but he was throwing a lot of pitches, giving up some runs, giving up some hits. It was the games, these last couple of starts, where he kind of cuts back on the strikeouts, forces the ground balls. I almost think of him, because the Reds had him a few years back, I almost think of him as a young Wade Miley, where Wade Miley is right now in his career. Graham Ashcraft has already learned that. So get the efficient outs, get out of the inning, get your lineup back on the field. He's better than, I think that his career arc projects to be better than Wade Miley, but that's just where my mind goes, is that quick, efficient innings, get in, get out, and get the lineup back going.
I mean, this is exactly what you want to see as a budding young team, to see some of those starters start to finally come around in their development in year 3. Exactly what you want to see. Not going to be so easy, though, with Graham Ashcraft going against Jordan Montgomery, who looks to have a bounce back. He's been good 2 of his 3 starts this year. His most recent start got absolutely crushed against the LA Dodgers, which a lot of pitchers can say this season. So against a Reds team who, as you mentioned, offensively, not the greatest in the world, maybe it could get, be a little bit of a get back on track game for Jordan Montgomery against the Reds. And then, like you said, that finale could be the big wild card in the series. Hunter Green, want to see what he looks like against his D-backs lineup. And then Slade Ciccone for the D-backs, just a guy who is trying to stay on the major league roster, fighting for his roster spot, was very good his first couple starts, got shelled most recently against the San Diego Padres. So he also looks to get back on track against the Cincinnati Reds team. But before we go today, Jeff, I want to ask you one final question. Who would you say is the X factor in this series? And it cannot be Elly De La Cruz, because he is too obvious.
Outside of EDLC, I think I'm going to go with CES. We're going to keep it in the letters realm, because here recently, he has really started to figure things out. He's had three of the last 4 games he's gotten a hit in. He's been hitting the ball hard the entire time. And low batting average aside, he's getting cheated a little bit as far as BABIP goes. So I really think that a breakout is coming. I think he is ready to hit the ball hard and be a difference maker in the series. And I do want to correct myself because I said that the Reds are off to face LA after the series. I'm wrong. They're off to face San Francisco, whatever. California, it's all like a state and stuff. So it's far away from Cincinnati. But no, I really look at CES to be the X factor in this because I think that he is ready for that breakout.
Yeah, and if you're looking for a breakout from the D-back side, Jeff mentioned earlier Alek Thomas returning in this series. He is not going to be my pick for the X Factor. My pick is actually going to be another returning D-backs in this series. Potentially, Paul Sewald should be activated. The D-backs have been down their closer the entire year. The bullpen has been a complete mess. Not saying Sewald is going to fix all those issues, but to have your closer back that moves everyone down just one slot in the bullpen in their normal, slots. Hopefully things get a little bit more even from that pen and the D-backs can throw some of their better relievers in this series. And I'm hoping a Scott McGuff gets DFA'd once Paul Sewald gets activated. That's all from our Locked On Diamondbacks, Locked On Reds crossover. Jeff, where can the D-backs listeners find you online?
You can find Locked On Reds everywhere you get your podcast, including right here on YouTube. You can also find me on X at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs.
Yeah, and for me, Miller Thomas, check out at CreatorThomas24 for the personal account on Twitter. I almost forgot the social account real quick. Or X, whatever you call it nowadays. Or look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram for the podcast handle. Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds, D-backs versus Reds upcoming series. We'll be back at it. More Diamondbacks news, coverage, and insight tomorrow after the D-backs take down the Reds in game number 1. Doses.